Well, ho, 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 ho. It is that time of year, folks. It's December, and it is December 3rd, which means I'm going to start talking about the relevance of Christmas. Now, if you don't know who I am, my name is John Solano. I'm a family counselor. I have been for over 10 years. And prior to that, I've been a counselor for over 30 years. So I've got about 30 plus years in the business. And as you can see, I'm getting whiter and whiter by the year. Pretty soon I will have a extra stream of income as a Santa. But I am working on my pre-Santa characterization, I suppose, right now. As you can see, as compared to my other videos, I have got props now. So since last year's video, Christmas videos, I'm now propping. Got my hat and poinsettia. So I've gone the distance, or at least gone a little farther this year. But the message is going to be the same. Now, I have struggled with trying to make short videos for a long time. And when it comes to kind of the Christmas stuff, things can get a little lengthy. But I wanted to share with you, kind of what I did last year a little bit, was I kind of want to make the case for Santa. Now, this past Tuesday in my parent leadership group, that group is amazing. It just covers so much material and at a pretty darn deep level. But I am a big fan of mythology, and I'm also a big fan of what we call Jungian psychology, and kind of taking advantage of the archetypal orchestrations that occur in our lives, in our communities, in our nations, and certainly seasons, if you will, and celebrations, especially around this time of year, are big around that. And there's a major focus, of course, around Christmas and the Christmas story. But again, this taking advantage of all this spirited stuff in the parent leadership group, and trying to answer some questions. Of course, in the parent leadership group and my work with families, it has a lot to do with resolving conflict and basically enhancing the health of relationships. And one of the things that I don't think is up for debate anymore is that we live in a time of inflated feelings of entitlement and indulgence. Entitlement and indulgence. So that has been something over the last 30 plus years that I have studied, that I've been teaching on. Parents often say that. Why is my son and daughter, they feel so entitled and they're so indulgent, and when we talk about indulgence, we're talking about, and this is the definition of indulgence: to partake in any thought, process, or thing that creates adverse consequences. In other words, to do things we know we shouldn't do, right? To do things we know we shouldn't do. Now, this has been something that all of us have struggled with since the beginning of time. Welcome to the planet. The little devil and the little angel are on our shoulder, and they're having it out on a regular basis. On a daily basis, we got this thing going on, this struggle, this little war zone on the inside, people say in our hearts, between good and evil. In my counseling work, this is how I do my thing. I'm called an integrity coach. That's how I present myself. I know everybody wants to be a person of integrity. What does that mean? To be a person of good character. It means that when you give your word, you keep your word, but not just any word. It has to be kind of the good word, the good news, if you will. Because within each of us, there is, unless there's something significantly off about us, there is kind of what I call a code of honor, comprised of a moral kind of code, or a moral foundation. It's really the foundation of our conscience. So when we cross the line and do something that we know we shouldn't do, we should have this ever growing, being ever refined, being ever embraced code of honor within that gives us support and direction and knowledge. It informs us of when we've crossed over the line. People say these days that they want to be their best self. Uh, Even now, people refer to that, meaning that within us there is this code of honor, this part of us that, if you will, is almost divine, noble. And then there's another part of us that acts in the world that's a little ornery, right? We're not always our best self, and when I'm working with families and when I introduce this idea, everybody can agree to that. First of all, that everybody wants to be a person of integrity. Everybody wants to be a person of good character. As parents, you want to raise kids of integrity. As moms and dads, you want to be moms and dads of integrity. You want to keep your word, and yet life shows up, right? And you get dealt a hand of cards, and sometimes that hand of cards is difficult, right? And it can cause us to show up in ways that aren't our best self. It can cause us to show up in ways that cause us to be ornery, that cause us to hurt other people, to just be not so kind to other people. You see that the season right now is a reminder of that one thing, right? It's a time to be kind to one another. It's also a reminder of something very fundamental about who we are as human beings, is that we're often not kind. Even though we want to be men and women and people of integrity, kind to other people, we're not. And we're full of ways psychologically where we deceive ourselves into thinking that we're good people, and we're not really. That is the truth of the human condition. I've said in my previous videos, we all like to say none of us are perfect, but very few people actually live that way. I can tell you from my perspective as a counselor for over 30 years, people say that but it becomes a cliche. People don't live it. Because if people lived in understanding that they're never perfect and they never will be, that would leave a person constantly in a state of healthy humility. Instead, conflict and tension is a lack of humility. It's a lack of the embracing of the truth of reality, of the human condition. That is the human condition. This is what goes on for us. We're have an internal war between that little devil and the little angel on the inside. And when people don't really want to embrace that, they often wage war in the outside. And so now we have war and division and all sorts of stuff going on outside of us. Again, that has been the human condition since the beginning of time. But now we have the season, right? We have a moment in time that reminds us of something very fundamental about who we are as human beings and what we strive towards. And so in the parent leadership group, I like to bring up this topic, this big topic, and connect some dots. And one major dot that we have been working on and unpackaging for a long time, and people resist this. Again, it's very much related to we're not perfect. And as a family counselor, of course, who's spent many, many hours and days and what have you in in educating myself and in workshops and presentations on human development, just basically saying, what do we all know? Is that we come into the world as infants. We're infantile. Consequently, what do infants need? Infants need to be brought up. We call it, bringing up our kids, raising up our kids. We call it maturation. And in order to do that, we have to enter into a discipline. So we call it discipline. People need discipline. And as parents, we call ourselves disciplinarians. You kind of connect all those dots, and what does it do? It really suggests that part of the reason we're on the planet is to move from some state of immaturity to something more mature. When we took a look at what maturity actually looks like, what most parents will say, I want my son or daughter to be a law-abiding, contributing citizen. So in other words, we're no longer all about ourselves. We realize that we're on the planet with a purpose, and that purpose is to contribute something to the rest of the world. That's a big part of maturity, is moving from a very selfish psychological orientation to a more generous psychological orientation. That's what we would call maturity, right? It's also a little bit paradoxical. It's like, it's like the more you know, the more you don't know. It's a less is more kind of an idea. The older we get, the less we need, but the more we enjoy giving to others, the more we enjoy making a contribution. This is a way of explaining, I guess you could say, an archetype. It's this archetype of individuation, of self-actualization. We're here to actualize what? Our best self. What's getting in the way? That's the question. Little devil on the shoulder. What does that really mean? Well, what I've been sharing with people for a long time, as inside of us, this is what we call infantile. If you were to call an adult or an adolescent person an infant, accuse them of being infantile, what would you be suggesting? It wouldn't be a compliment, would it? You'd be suggesting these three things: that the person is narcissistic, meaning that they think way too much of themselves, that they're egocentric, they think the world should revolve around them, and they're grandiose, meaning that they know everything, they're all powerful. Those three characteristics are massively alive and well in the human psyche at a very, very base level, deeply, deeply ingrained in us. One could say, from a developmental position, it has to be that way. Why? Because when we're born, and I'm pretty sure this is the fact around this, as out of all mammals, we're the most vulnerable for the longest period of time in our lives. In other words, our primary preoccupation as human beings when we're born is to survive. It has to be about us. Everything has to be about us. That's the infant perspective. I must survive. I, me, I, me. So when you hear adolescents or anybody really kind of in childhood, adolescence, and as an adult, and they're all about themselves, I, me, if you hear that in their language, it means they're coming from a very infantile place, a very egocentric place, right? A very narcissistic place, a very grandiose place. Those things are alive and well in us all the time. All right, you still with me? Connecting these dots, right? Here's the deal. Here's what I said in the parent leadership group. What are the similarities, or what do you think the commonality is? What's the common theme here between the Christmas story, right? Scrooge, right? Santa Claus, and the Boogeyman, just to name a few. What do you think the themes are? The major theme is, or one of the most major themes in it. And then I went on and I shared, let me share with you a Christmas song, right? You better watch out. You better not cry. You better not pout, right? Because I'm telling you why Santa Claus is coming to town. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good. So be good for goodness sake, right? I was asking the parents in the parent leadership group, is that supposed to be a happy song? It's a song that's sung. It's tradition. It's connected to an archetype, this thing called Santa Claus. What is Santa Claus? What does this song say? In the parent leadership group, we use a lot of quotes and a lot of stories from many, many wisdom traditions. And this is one of those wisdom traditions, one of those wisdom stories. Right away, the story says what? You better watch out. You better not cry. You better not pout, because something's coming. It's called Santa Claus. And whatever this source is, whatever this being is, it sees you when you're sleeping. It knows when you're awake. It knows whether you've been bad or good. So be good for goodness sake. You see, it presents this archetype, if you will. It pretends, it creates this persona, this presence of something bigger than the infantile ego. Remember, the infantile ego is grandiose. It thinks it's all powerful, all knowing. But now it has encountered something bigger than itself. You know, this thing called Santa Claus. It knows if you've been bad or good. It knows when you're awake. It knows when you're sleeping. And it's keeping track of it all. So be good, for goodness sake. You see, that was one of the key pieces in the parent leadership group when we began to unpackage this. It says, be good. For whose sake? Be good for goodness sake. Not because your mom says so, because your dad says so, or even because you think you should be good. Be good for goodness sake. Where does goodness lie? Where does goodness come from? That's the Christmas story. We be good because there's a source out here somewhere that is good. We can't pull it off ourselves. Be good for goodness sake. But the idea is that there's something out there monitoring us, something bigger than what we can get our heads around, bigger than what we can get our hands on. And it knows us intimately. It keeps track of it all. See, these are the kinds of pieces of mythology that contain the infantile psyche. It contains that core of narcissism. It also tempers it. Because in our most narcissistic states, we want to think we're the end all be all, that we have the answer to everything, right? That's like godlike, that we know everything, that we can, change the weather at will, that we can, predict the future. This is who we end up being in our narcissistic state. We can't. We have to understand our limitations. The infantile part of the psyche, the immature part of us, needs to be disciplined. It needs to be contained, and it needs to be tempered. It needs to know its place. It needs to know that there's something bigger than it, that it can't control, and that there will be consequences to behavior. I was saying to the parent leadership group, I'm guessing that we know that the story of Santa Claus and the belief in Santa Claus has dwindled, as have many other belief in mythological stories or spiritual disciplines and religions. That has dwindled. And I wonder if there's a price to pay for that. And I think there is. But I was saying, can you remember when you were told that there was no Santa Claus? How old were you and how did it happen? If you were like me, it probably was told to you by some older kids, maybe your older brother, older sister, but somebody a bit older than yourself. It was almost like they couldn't wait to tell you that there was no Santa Claus. And the parents are usually warning them off. Hey, don't say that. Don't tell, little Billy that. But then they have to whisper it in secret, almost as a way to kind of alleviate the anxiety. It's like, oh, I need to tell you, there is no Santa Claus. Oh, thank God. Oh my gosh, thanks. Yeah, that's such a relief, to know that wasn't real. And so this is kind of the human condition as well, too. We want to escape that. We don't want to feel like we're smaller than something, that something's monitoring us, that we're accountable to something bigger than ourselves, that there's something out there that is more knowledgeable than ourselves. That's the narcissist within us, right? Because when somebody is narcissistic, they can't handle the competition. They got to be numero uno, number one. That's what a narcissist does. That's what the immature person does. Got to eliminate the competition. Got to say that it doesn't exist. And yet, whether you believe in Santa Claus or not is not the point. The point is that the human psyche needs something, an awareness of something bigger than itself, to contain it and to temper it. Of course, from day to day, most of us live that out quite easily, don't we? We're not talking about something airy fairy. From day to day, what do we have? We have parents. We have other adults in our life. As we're little, we have to look up to these giants who are all powerful, who wield all sorts of power. There is something bigger than us. We know this, and we live that out daily. And parents often act for their children as a force of containment for their errant behavior. And they help those children temper their behavior and direct their behavior in a way that more reflects their potential, if you will, and their best self. This is discipline. So we know this to be true. But what we have always had in place is stories and mythology to keep us all in check. You see, when a parent can tell a good story, it's like they have an ally, something bigger than themselves, right? It's now you've got a huge, powerful ally with your that you can, that kind of is embedded or enmeshed in your family tradition, in your family name, and you know it's part of the foundation of morality. That's how we often build our moral foundation, is through stories that have morals. We used to tell a lot of stories and say, what's the moral to the story? What morals are in the story? And we tell stories as a way to begin to weave together a foundation of morality within our own psyches, our own families. And all that is very much dwindling. So I mentioned a couple of other stories real quick. What about the boogeyman? I did a little research on the boogeyman. It says that the archetype of the boogeyman exists in many, many different cultures. But the reason why this story is told is it's meant to scare children who misbehave. It's meant to keep them in line. It's meant to keep the immature ego in line. Again, the boogeyman is a faceless, nameless, if you will, dark entity that shows up unexpectedly, something you can't control, something that's scary, and it specifically is attracted to people who are not living in integrity, people who are, again, hurting other people, who are misbehaving, who are, cruel, mean, selfish. That's the story. Scrooge, isn't it the same thing? That's obvious, isn't it? It's the story of an elderly person who's just basically selfish and ornery and hard-hearted and cruel and uncaring, and so this individual has to have several encounters with some very powerful spiritual entities that are bigger than him, and there's not anything he can do about it. Comes out transformed. Hmm? Yeah. And then, of course, on top of them all, we've got the Christmas story, right? The Christmas story, a story that graphically illustrates the human condition and how out of integrity we all are, how deeply embedded our narcissism, grandiosity, and egocentricity are embedded in our psyche. How graphically it speaks to how we as human beings have not treated each other well at all, and how it is possible for us to return to our best self. There is a way being provided, and there are also consequences. All this told in a story, a gigantic mythic logos, so much bigger than the infantile, immature psyche. And it offers the stark reality of the condition in which we find ourselves as individuals and as community and as the world, and then offering hope and love. The little devil and the little angel, right? It's not a one-sided story where, you know what, this is the human condition, game over. No, that is not the season, folks. That is not the season. You know, but it is the road less traveled, as they say, because again, what must first be exposed is our naughtiness. What must first be exposed is our lack of integrity, our selfishness. And we must come to terms with that. And we must experience humility, a reduction in ourselves. We must become innocent again. And we can't do that with it, but through our own work. It takes something bigger to have that happen. Again, if the immature ego could get a hold of the recipe in order to free itself from any remorse or any guilt, wow, that would be psychotic. Basically, it would be, you know, a dictator gone wild. And so that hope has to lie outside us. There's so much more I could say about this and connect more dots developmentally. I'm constantly trying to do that in the work that I do in the parent leadership group, is weaving together wisdom teachings and spiritual disciplines with traditional psychology. So you could see that it makes sense. We're not talking about something airy fairy out there. We're talking about something that's very essential to the human psyche. And it always has been and always will be essential to the human psyche. And it's a warning to be careful, parents, to be careful, everybody, to not throw the baby out with the bathwater, if you will, to not jump from the frying pan into the fire, to not dismiss the wisdom teachings, to not dismiss, if you will, the spirit of the season, the spirit of all these wonderful spiritual and cultural events that are out there that promote humility, that promote personal accountability. Be accountable for one's behavior, but also know that those are forgivable. But we can't forgive what we don't admit, right? This is the best of who we are as human beings. To be real about us as who we are as human beings. We have to be real about that, to give ourselves permission to be real about who we are. As I said, who are we? We're imperfect. None of us are perfect. None of us ever will be. That means we're constantly going to be making poor choices, constantly going to be stepping on each other's toes. But there's forgiveness as well through personal accountability and responsibility. And that needs to be handled very lovingly. A lot of times I see in societies and, you know, families, this idea of accountability and responsibility is used as a whip, is used to bludgeon people. These virtues cannot be forced upon people. They must be received willingly, because an individual or a community or family sees that there's benefit, there's great benefit. When a parent or the leaders in the community try to force these things onto a community, a family, it just goes terribly wrong. Remember, folks, this is a love story. That's what this time of the year is. It should bring us back to the truth of who we really are as loving beings. And in standing in that truth, like a light or the sun that shines, it exposes where we have stepped over the line. But it also offers hope that we can once again return to the truth of who we are, our best self. That's always available. That's the season, folks. So as you're going through your seasonal period here in this journey, especially now, it's been a rough year. And it may be a rough next year as well for many, many people. It's going to take us some time to get back on our feet. We need to embrace and bring into our hearts the spirit. Be kind to yourself. But see yourself accurately. See yourself in the light of truth. You're not perfect, nor is everybody else. Be kind to yourself. Admit when you do something wrong. Say you're sorry. Practice a daily practice of kindness and appreciation for one another. You know, the highest levels of maturity are to begin to see that you, me, everybody, it is just completely out of integrity. There's nothing that we can do about it. And in that moment, we can begin to see, wow, I'm surrounded by forgiveness. I'm surrounded by grace. I'm surrounded by love. And life once again becomes a blessing, becomes a miracle. That's possible, folks. And much needed right now in the time that we're in. So take your personal inventory. Be real with yourself, and then look at your spouse. Then look at your children. You'll see them in a whole new light. You'll be so grateful and thankful that they're in your life. So, thank you for listening to this Christmas story, if you will. I'm going to keep doing videos. There's a couple more I want to do on the Christmas theme. And so stay connected. Stay connected. I'm wishing you all the best, and I'll be thinking about you through the season. Take care.